Well, thank you all very much for having me here today. Board members of the ITMA and Diana and John Hark to invite me here to talk a little bit about you guys' worst nightmare. So we're going to talk a little bit about salvage contracts, common law salvage, the Lloyd's Open Forum. That's probably one of your worst nightmares. And then we have some other salvage contracts. They actually end more in the wreck removal area, although it could also be for salvage. And then we're going to talk about general average claims. And to start with that, when is general average applicable? And this is a pretty good summary of all of that, and keep that in mind. We're going to go through a couple of case studies after these slides, and we're going to see if general average is actually applicable here. So put this one in your head. This is a general average act when and only when any extraordinary sacrifice or expenditure is intentionally and reasonably made or incurred for the common safety or the purpose of preserving from peril the property involved in a common maritime adventure. Now that's a whole mouthful, but let's get into it. We have a good friend, and I have some friends over here as well, and they were sailing on a Sunday afternoon in the bay, the Galveston Bay, and ran into trouble, probably because of bad fuel or something. And they needed to be towed in, so they were looking around, and there was this boat passing by, and they brought them into port. And the typical first question is that, is this a salvage claim? And the answer to that one is yes. Everybody in this room can be a salver. If you go to a vessel in distress and you help it by towing it into port or saving it from a fire or something like that, you can bring it into port, and you're entitled to a salvage claim. You can receive payment from the owner, you can receive payment from the insurance, and then none of them want to pay, you can go to court, and then the judge will make an award for you. Obviously, this is only a small claim, so maybe we're talking here about maybe even a few $1,000s to get this done. So, common law salvage. It's also applicable in the US, it's in most countries around the world. It's all part of the United Nations Salvage Convention. So, if you rescue a ship at sea, you're entitled to a common law salvage claim. And that was a really interesting one in this case. So, a couple of years ago, there was a hurricane going from the Gulf, and it was going across Florida into the Atlantic, and then it made a loop and it came back. And what was happening is that this tow combination was actually towing a tank of a space shuttle. The barge was loading. You see the little canopy on there. There's a space shuttle tank in it. You know, the big center tank of the space shuttle. It was built in I think it was Louisiana or Alabama, and that little tugboat started towing that thing around Key West up north to Cape Canaveral, where it will be attached to the space shuttle and then used to launch the space shuttle. So this tugboat ran into trouble. First one engine went out, the steering gear went out, the other engine went out, all kinds of problems, and it started drifting towards the shoal. And if they would have been on the shoal, then it would have lost the tug, and they would have lost the barge and the tank. Well, it happened to be that that tanker over there, the Cherry Valley, captained by Captain Skip Strong, was in the area, and they heard the distress call. Imagine this is a tanker that's loaded with 60,000 barrels of oil. And they're looking at the situation, and they hear on the radio, they hear the maydays, and so what are we going to do? And this captain had the nerve to actually go in there and hook up a tow line. And obviously a tanker doesn't have a tow line, right? So they tied some mooring lines together. And they managed to hook up to the tugboat, and they managed to save this barge with the tug and the space shuttle tank. There's a nice book about it. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Imperial. Alright, so was this tanker entitled to a salvage claim? And the answer to that one is yes. Obviously they they put in the salvage claim as the owners and the crew of the vessel, which is also entitled to a salvage reward. And the judge basically will look at what happened there, and they will value what the award should be on the basis of the degree of success of the venture. Well, in this case, they managed to save the tug, the barge, and the tank. The degree of danger, when obviously there was in the middle of a hurricane trying to hook up to a tugboat with a loaded tanker and a couple of mooring lines. There's a lot of danger involved in that. And the value of the property solved. And that's where the interesting thing came in. Because obviously the tugboat is maybe a couple of $1 million worth. The barge is maybe a couple of $1 million worth. But the tank of the space shuttle, how much is that worth, right? And another thing for the value of the award will be how much effort was being put into protect the environment. That's obviously an important thing these days. So a whole legal battle went on for probably 2 years. And at the end of the day, the first court awarded $4.5 million to the ship owner and the crew. Why is that? Because it turns out that space shuttle tank is actually worth $50 million. And the replacement value, you can imagine if you delay a space shuttle program, what the impact of that would be. So all of those things were taken into account, and the first instance, $4.5 million was awarded to the ship company, and because it was obviously a ship, and the rest was split among the 25-person crew. And then it was appealed, of course, and then it was a little bit later, but lowered. But at the end of the day, Captain Strong walked away with $300,000 by saving the barge of a space shuttle. It's a really amazing story. If you want to know more about all of that, I really recommend the book. It's a very good read. There are pictures in there and all of that. So yes, common law salvage claim. Everybody can do it in this room with a vessel. Go out there and save a ship, bring it into port, and get the award. Alright, then those are basically the amateur category. Then you have the professional salvers. There are a couple of players in the whole world that do this stuff for a living. And I see Guillermo Hernandez sitting over there from Ireland. I'm going to show a case from them in the next couple of slides. But how do they do it when a ship is in distress? Well, they go for a Lloyd's Open Form. And what is a Lloyd's Open Form? Well, it's basically that document. It's 2 pages. The only thing you have to fill in there is the name of the ship, the name of the salvage company, where you're going to redeliver the vessel. Obviously you need to sign it and date it, and you're going to incorporate Scopic, yes or no, we'll talk about that later. And if you sign that document, basically you have an arrangement with the salver, and he has the absolute drive to do his best endeavors to get the vessels saved in the cargo. It's all no Q, no pay, so if it's not successful, you don't need to pay anything. So if they lose the ship. So it's a very simple agreement. It's already more than 100 years old to get the salvage operations underway. All right, let's go to this case. This is a good case of a classic Lloyd's Open Form. The salvers on this case were Smith Salvage, just around the corner as well, and Ireland also around the corner. They jointly responded to this thing. And this is a container vessel from Maersk, and it went on fire in the middle of the Indian Ocean. You can imagine that about logistics problems, right? I mean, that's all days sailing away from any port over there. So the salvage crew, they board tugs all the way around the coast of the Indian Ocean, and they go over there and start firefighting this thing, and you're going to see it. The good thing was that the fire was actually in front of the accommodation, so most of the cargo over there was damaged. But the cargo behind the accommodation actually looks in pretty decent shape here. So here comes already a little bit of, this was also a general average case. So you think if you're the container in the front, obviously you're going to lose all your stuff, right, because it's all burnt. But the container in the back actually also needs to contribute to the salvage of the vessel. We'll talk about that later with an exact calculation example of that. So here a little bit more detail about the inside. You see the extent of the damage that this kind of fire brings to these ships.
What caused the fire?
To be honest, I don't know, but what we see lately is there's a lot of cases where people are not representing what is actually inside the containers. And there was a case last year on the North Atlantic with Jan Thai, and it were little, how do you call that, little smoke...
charcoal briquettes.
Charcoal briquettes, exactly, okay, you got that word again. Yeah, so it can be the most weirdest things that cause these things. I mean, obviously lithium batteries are a popular cause of fire. It can also be cargo that doesn't respond to water. It can be leaking cargo into other ones. So I'm sure all the experts can make a living out of figuring out exactly what happened, although trying to do that from this rubble is also it's going to be pretty challenging there. So what happened in this case is obviously the front of the vessel was completely destroyed by the fire, and what they did is they cut off the front in Dubai, and they picked up the stern, which was still in good condition, and obviously that's the most expensive part of the ship, right, because it has the engine room in it. They put it on a semi-submersible and they brought it back to Korea, and they glued a new front on it. And now it's believed it's called Maersk Halifax, so just so you know. So it's probably the safest ship to transport cargo on, because you know fires happening twice is not so statistically you should be okay there, right? So yeah, the salvage got paid on the basis of Lloyd's Open Form, and obviously the general average they made a big contribution to paying the salvage award. So how is that salvage award established? And it's very similar to the Common Salvage Award, but there are some extras in that. Obviously the salvage value, in this case is the stern of the vessel and the engine room and all the cargo that's in the back of that ship. And imagine that, right? We're talking about a 15,000 TEU container ship here. We got container ships of 22,000 TEU these days. The values of these vessels by assets could easily be $1 billion or more. All depends on what you put in there, right? So that's a big driver there. Skill and efforts of the salver in preventing and minimizing damage. Obviously, if you have the professional, that will also save a lot of damage to the cargo. The measure of success. I mean, if the salver brings the ship in very close to the place of delivery, but it still sinks afterwards, that's not much of a success. So that will lower definitely the award. Nature of and degree of danger. I mean, climbing on board a vessel that size, that's you're going to go what, 40, 50, 60 feet over a ladder just to board a vessel in the middle of the Indian Ocean that's on fire. So that's going to be measured in there. The skill, obviously, life. That's the number one thing, of course. In that case, unfortunately, there were several crew members perished. The time used and the expenses, obviously the out-of-pockets of what is really spent on this case is going to be a big determination on what the award is. The risk and liability that was taken, the promptness of the service rendered, how quick did they come into action. And I can assure you with all the professional salvage companies that is a 24-hour phone watch, and you can have teams on the way in a matter of hours. And in most cases, well, in the middle of the Indian Ocean is probably going to be more difficult, but I think they can probably reach most places on the planet within 24 hours. The available and the use of vessels or other equipment intended for salvage operation. And then this one, the state of readiness and efficiency of the salvage equipment and the value thereof. And this is an important thing. The nice thing about professional salvage is that they have equipment in warehouses, they have trained crews, and if there is no work, they don't get any money. So how do they maintain all of that stuff? Well, when they have a Lloyd's Open Form, that's when they make the big bucks, and then all that money comes into those companies and they can spend it on getting everything ready. So you have the major salvage companies, they have warehouses around the world so they can quickly respond. So what they want to do with the Lloyd's Open Forum, they want to incentivize salvage companies to go out there and be ready. And for instance, like in this example, if you have in the Bay of Biscay or the North Sea in the winter day, which is very rough seas over there, you know, salvage company might actually want to station a tug there. So if in case something happens, they can quickly go to the site. But obviously that's all money up front on a gamble that maybe something happens. So in order to keep these salvage companies alive, you need to make sure that the awards are high enough to make that happen. It's difficult to do this stuff on just a daily hire, or you know, a little bit more expensive hire for a tugboat. It needs to be substantial to keep the expertise going. All right, and then this one. This is actually going on right now. It's in Georgia. This also started as a lost Scopic, and let me explain Scopic a little bit. LOF is there to incentivize the seller to make sure that they can make the big bucks. But what are you going to do if the value of the vessel is scrap, basically? And what happened here in this case, we have a vessel here that's loaded with a couple of thousand cars, and it took a turn and it flipped over, and all those cars are immediately damaged and destroyed and underwater and on fire. So basically, what you have over here is a big scrap pile. So what did they come up with in the Lloyd's Open Forum? They when you incorporate Scopic, you can also invoke Scopic. And if you see, well, this is a pretty hopeless case, but we do want to put in an effort to protect the environment, then we can invoke Scopic. And then the seller can go out there and he still gets paid on a daily rate, basically. Daily rates. So he gets like $2,200 for a salvage master. He gets $1,800 for a naval architect, and so on and so on. So that's how this is built. This is an interesting case here because in the United States they have OPA 90, and OPA 90 requires any ship sailing on the US to appoint a salvage company before going into the US. In this case, it was Don John Smith who got the initial response, and they signed quickly Lloyd's Open Forum with Scopic. And they went to work, and one of the first things that they did is actually get a few people out that were still inside the ship, which must have been a pretty hairy operation. So right now, that project actually there's a lot of news going on about it. Went actually to tender, where the different salvage companies can actually bid the wreck removal of this, and at this moment, and there is still a lot of legal issues going on. Company from Galveston, TNT, they have the contract, and what they intend to use is this crane bars, is the first bar VB 10,000, and they think they're going to lift these sections out like this and put it on a barge, and hopefully this will be done by the summer. Hopefully. Alright, okay. Then here another format, and that's more for the wreck removal. You can also do wreck removal without an OQ pay, but you just go on a daily hire system. You can agree to that. It's also very popular, also in emergency response deals. And the good thing about it is, if you're really dealing with a very complex case, then you might want to do it on a daily hire, because it's difficult for the salvage company to, estimate how much risk is really involved in that. So we all know this one, right? I mean, this is not a cruise ship in distress. Right? I've seen that a lot lately, of course. This one, Captain Scatino took a wrong turn near Giglio and ended up on the rocks. And fortunately, most of the people could get off. And what the owners of the ship did, together with their insurance companies, and there are kind of two sort of insurance companies on the ship. You got the casco insurance, like you have on your car, the all risk, that's called Hull and Machinery, and you have the P&I insurance, that's like the general liability insurance. And they all sit together. They appoint a consultant, and they reach out to the salvage company and say, "Can you please come up with a plan?" And everybody was, of course, very eager to get this one. I worked at the time for a company that didn't get it, but the other company did, and very successfully. They came up with this plan, and they went to work. And that was Titan Salvage, which is now became Ardent later. ship's laying there, they put on some ballast tanks, they put on some strain jacks, and they start pulling on that with a lot of power and a lot of force, and they manage to get the vessel upright. Here it's still standing on the platform, and you can see nicely the whole line of where the water was when it was laying on an angle. So here the ship is sitting upright. Then they continue installing buoyancy tanks on the side, because there was so much damage in this vessel that it would never float by itself. It would probably fall over right away. So just to keep it stable. And then a couple of tugboats came. All I'm talking about here is about 2-3 years of work, right? A couple of tugboats came with the buoyancy tanks, and they towed it to a facility in it was Genoa, and there they had to deepen the port even to get this thing out, and then they start scrapping it away, and the Costa Concordia's probably cars or razor blades by now. All right. Then we have this one, it's another classic. If the salvage company feels, well, there is a lot of we know what we're doing with the environment, also the political climate in these countries is a big thing. I mean, if this was a case in the US, it would have been a lot more dicey to work, but this is actually in the southern tip of Chile. And the salvage company feels, yeah, I'm confident about removing this thing. We can just make it in lump sum stages, where each of the stages is actually a no Q, no pay stage. Then we can do it as well. So that's exactly what they did. This one was removed by a company from Fort Lauderdale, Resolve. They came in there with two barges all the way around the world to get it out there, and they used their chain puller system, and they managed to basically pull it back and put it up straight, and then they floated her and towed her offshore and scuttled her there after they took out all the pollutants. There we go. So if you really know what you're doing as a salvage company, you can go in on 100% no Q, no pay, and you can go in on a wreck fixed, where you're basically saying to the insurance company, say, guys, if you pay me X amount of dollars, I'll get this job done. If I'm not successful, then you don't have to pay me anything. So here we're talking about the case in Chile as well, in Talcahuano, where in 2010 the nation got rocked over by a big tsunami as a result of an earthquake. And what happened there is that vessel was actually on a slipway ready to be launched into the water. By the earthquake, it got shaken down and already by accident launched itself. So it was bobbing around in the bay, and then the tsunami came and it picked the whole vessel up and it threw it on a beach nearby. And the underwriters and the consultants reached out to the industry, and I was actually working for that company at the time that did this job, and we came up with a plan to pick up the ship and then drive it onto a barge in a dry dock. That's a big dry dock where the barge is sitting in, and then we would empty out the dry dock. We put the barges on top of the dock blocks. We fill up the barge with water, and then we fill up the dry dock again, and then the vessel floats again. So it was a successful job. We got all the money that we asked for, and there was an additional clause in this one actually that in case we would add additional damage to the ship, we'd actually be liable for that. So the more certainty you have, the more easy it is to make these lump sum bids. All right, so we're going back to general average, and that's the definition we just talked about. So let's go to a practical case of that. And let's say you're in Houston and you think, hey, I want to export some classic American sports car, and I'm going to put them in a container. And instead of doing it by truck, I'm going to put it on a container ship, and it's heading to Mexico or to Europe or something like that. But unfortunately, this happens. and study actually you could say the box with the sports car in it is actually it's not completely lost, but it's also damaged by it. So, and realize the general average is all about value, right? It's all about money. So, fire breaks out on a ship at $1 million with $3 million worth of cargo. Yeah, so that's $4 million in total of value at the start of the voyage. After the fire, the vessel had to be scrapped and sold for scrap, and you get $100,000 for it. Probably a little bit more if the size of this ship, but let's just keep to that. So lost $900,000 after the incident. The salvage, basically the firefighting and returning the vessel to a safe harbor, cost about $500,000, which is pretty cheap for a job like this. And $900,000 worth of cargo was lost, and the administrative cost following the events of $50,000. Believe me, if you have a general average case this size, you're going to be swamped with consultants. Because if this thing goes alongside, and you need to, basically every box needs to go to shore, it needs to be opened, and it needs to be inspected by several surveyors to establish what is really the value. So think about this, if you have I was involved in a case in the south of England, MSC Napoli, which is, I think it was 4,000 or 5,000 TEU. And just the space that you're going to need to store these containers on shores is going to be enormous. And I think if you have like I think the biggest one right now is 23,000 TEU, the MSC Gulson. It cannot get into the Port of Houston, but there's not enough space in the Port of Houston to store all those containers. So just think about the logistics that you're going to be involved of that if you're going to be running into that. So, okay, so $4 million before the event. After the event, $2,200, $2.2 million, and handling costs. So basically, the cost of loss due to the incident, $2.350 million, or 58.75%. And keep these percentages in mind. So, let's say these two cars are $25,000 worth $25,000, and there's a little bit of damage to it, some paint damage maybe, or fire damage, or any kind of damage. So there was a reduction in value. Then the owner of this container basically would get a general average proceed, would basically get money, right, of $10,000. But they also need to, they also get a bill for the 58.75%, which is $14,688. So that's basically how the general average works. Okay. Who determines the general average? Basically, when the ship, the captain or the shipping company, they're probably the ones that are going to declare general average, basically asking you to contribute in solving this issue. And also on that side, just to keep track of all the costs and the value of all the different cargoes of all these containers, it's going to be a very hectic job. So realize, if you have a container on the ship that's in distress and is brought in, it's probably going to take a long time before you're going to have that cargo back in your hands. So, in order to speed this thing up, what you will probably see as a cargo owner is once the ship is into port, safely into port, and they can start discharging. And here's a good case, it's the Yantayan Express on the North Atlantic last year, is that they will go and reach out to the cargo owner, and they will ask for a general average security, and the salver, because he wants to make sure that he gets paid as well, because obviously the cargo is also part of the salvage claim. They want to see a salvage security. So it's of the essence, when you make a shipment like that, that you have the proper cargo insurance, and that the insurance that you have is also covers the general average. Because if you don't have that, then your insurance company will not help you, and then somehow you have to provide the salvage security and the general average security. But if you don't know how to do that, you actually need to make a cash deposit to get your cargo back. So that's That's an important one there as well. You see general average a lot in container ships. There's many parties involved, and last year was really a big year, and a lot of container ships actually went on fire. So maybe we're seeing a trend here. That's a good one, or maybe it's just 1 year of bad luck. But it happens a lot, and I think with the size of these container ships, that actually the chances of one of these containers having an issue and going on fire is getting bigger. So be aware of that when you're shipping like that. And as you can see, the Maersk Conan that we talked about earlier was also a general average case. Okay, if you like this topic and you want to read more about it, on Sunday afternoon with a glass of wine, here are some really good books about it. They're none of mine, so don't worry about that, but they really explain a lot of these topics very well. I mean, there's Imperial, we just talked about, the space shuttle tank. That's the US Gulf story. Races Under, that's actually Canadian. Jan de Hartog is a Dutch story, and Wilbur Smith is a South African. And they talk a lot about Lloyd's Open Forms and Scopic and salvage cases in the past. There you go. Alright, I also have a YouTube channel. If you go to my website, there's a little YouTube icon, and if you click on there, there's a database of about 50, 60 salvage cases in the past, and probably when you watch them all, you can make an application as a professional salver. So. Alright, any questions? Yeah, gentleman in the back.
Yes, a simple 1 or 2 line solution for a prudent shipper placing insurance.
Well, prudent shipper, like I said, make sure general average is including in your cargo insurance, and make sure you have that cargo insurance. But as prudent, you also have to think about making sure that, and we see this really a lot in these container cases, make sure that you describe on a manifest what's really in the container. I've seen a case in the MSC Napoli is one of them. It's actually a container ship that broke in two, and a lot of that had to do with misrepresenting the actual weight of the container. And you can imagine these huge vessels, if there's mistakes made in the loading, the forces that can develop in these container ships are huge, and they actually break open. At MSC Napoli with the Mole Comfort, there was another case in the Indian Ocean. That vessel actually broke in half, and both of the sections sank, and never made it to port. So make sure what's in there, and if there is dangerous good in there, like the charcoal briquettes or the lithium batteries, so make sure that's on there, so the shipper of the ship owner knows where to put that container. Because if you put it on the bow and you're going to be exposed to spray and water, that might actually be in sort of ignition. There's a famous case in Egypt where a small container vessel actually went on the beach, and what you typically do is you put the really dangerous cargo also far away from the accommodation. And there the US Navy, or not the US Navy, the Egyptian Navy became involved in the salvage operation, and they thought it was actually a good idea to use a helicopter and to dump water onto the nitro peroxide or something. So think about that. When you have a ship with containers, appoint a salver, right? Loads open form. If it's really a case of are we going to make it, yes or no, and that something needs to happen now, and you don't want to deal with lengthy contract negotiations, go for the Lloyd's open form. It's the contract in the last couple of years has been used less and less and less. But actually, it is the best way to save your ship and the cargo. And obviously, if there is time, you can bring in a tugboat and all of those things. Yeah, then it's probably better to go on some kind of daily rate system. But if the shit hits the fan, then just sign the LOF and make sure that that's your biggest chance of actually bringing ship and cargo back to port.
Just to make it clear, no matter if my cargo contributed to the general average, I will have to contribute to the general average.
Everybody, yeah, because think about this kind of developed in, imagine this, so we have a container ship and it's sinking. right? And we're thinking, okay, what do we need to do to save the ship? Well, we got to throw cargo overboard. Okay, guys, whose cargo wants to go first, right? That's kind of how where that came from. It's already old. It's a system that's also like 100 years old. So the cargo that gets thrown overboard, that saves the ship. Is obviously that is going to be compensated for that, and the other ones all chip in to pay the salver and the lost damage. So it's a pretty smart system on how to. Yes, ma'am.
Just looking at the photographs that you showed today, and some of the containers are untouched. I mean, they're still viable or good. So, I mean, when an incident like that happens, does the adjuster just evaluate the containers that were affected, or is it the entire ship?
No, the entire ship, yeah.
The
They
entire
will look
ship's
at that, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So the container all the way on the bow, you'd say, well, if this fire is put out, right? The container all the way in the bow, does it have any damage? I mean, not very likely. They're going to inspect it, they're going to say, yeah. And yes, your insurance, if you have it, is going to have to pay for the general average ship plan. Yeah. Yeah. So realize that. Make sure you have that general average cover in your insurance.
But my container wasn't touched, sorry, it's gone.
Oh, yeah. So your container is perfectly fine. You still need a chip in. Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah. So you can put it on a truck. It's probably more expensive, but.
So did we ease your nightmares or add to it? Well, I took away from it a job opportunity. I didn't really like cruises, but maybe I'll learn how to be on the water so I can help salvage a vessel in the near future. Seems like big money. But we would like to thank you for your participation, and then we would like to